I still remember the day I met Brian. Back then I thought he was charming. His smile could light up a room. His words felt warm, promising, safe. He wasn't just a man I loved. He was the man I believed would protect me, cherish me, build a life with me. I was young, full of dreams, and naive enough to think love was enough to last forever. When we got married, I thought my story had begun, a story of happiness, children, family, and devotion. And in the beginning, it was almost like that. We laughed, we held hands, we whispered late into the night about our future. When our son Jim was born, I thought we were a real family. When Emma came a few years later, my heart was complete. I imagined us raising them together, growing old side by side. But I was wrong. Slowly, almost too slowly to notice at first, Brian began to change. Or maybe he had always been this way, and I just refused to see it. His temper grew shorter, his patience thinner. He criticized me for little things, the way I cooked, the way I dressed, the way I raised the children. His words, once sweet, turned sharp, cutting into me in ways no one else could see. At first, I told myself it was stress. He worked hard, he was providing for us, maybe I should be more understanding. But the truth was clear. He wasn't tired. He wasn't stressed. He was cruel. Jim, our son, followed quickly in his father's footsteps. As he grew older, he mirrored Brian's disdain for me. If I asked him to help, he rolled his eyes. If I reminded him of his responsibilities, he snapped back, mocking me. He laughed with his father at my expense, joining in the chorus of criticism. And every time I swallowed my pain, I told myself to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to protect Emma from the tension. Emma, my sweet, gentle Emma, was the only light in those years. She saw me. She understood, even as a little girl, that her mother was hurting. She'd slip into the kitchen to help me cook. She'd sit beside me when I cried quietly at night, pretending not to, and she would whisper, "It's okay, Mom, I'm here." Those words kept me alive. Years passed and my marriage became a prison. Brian didn't hit me, not physically, but his words were bruises no one could see. His neglect was its own kind of violence. He cheated me of love, of respect, of the life I had once dreamed of. And then came the day Emma met Jack. Jack was kind, gentle, respectful, everything Brian wasn't. The first time he came to visit, I saw the way he looked at Emma, with admiration, not possession. And for the first time in years, I felt hope. Hope that Emma wouldn't have to live the life I did. But Brian hated Jack. He dismissed him, calling him weak, unworthy, not good enough for his daughter. Jim sided with him, of course, mocking Emma, mocking Jack, twisting every moment into an opportunity to belittle. But Emma stood firm. She defended Jack, defended her choice, defended herself. That strength, I wished I had found it when I was her age. When Emma and Jack got engaged, I thought maybe, just maybe, Brian would soften, that he would see how happy his daughter was, that he would put aside his pride. But instead, his cruelty grew worse. He humiliated me at the engagement dinner, seating me in the kitchen. Away from the family, away from the guests. He wanted to erase me, to remind me I was nothing. I sat there humiliated, tears burning in my eyes, my heart breaking. Jim walked by, smirking as though my pain was a joke. And Brian didn't even look at me. To him, I wasn't even there. But what they didn't realize was that I had had enough. That night, as I sat alone, I picked up my phone. My hands shook. My chest was tight, but my mind was clear. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, and as the voice on the other end answered, a strange calm washed over me. For the first time, I wasn't calling for help. I wasn't calling in fear. I was calling to take back control, because something inside me had shifted, something that had been buried under years of insults, and silence had finally awakened. I was no longer just a wife, no longer just a mother, no longer just a shadow. I was ready to fight back. The days after Emma's engagement should have been filled with joy. My daughter was glowing, her smile wide, her laughter unshaken even by her father's harsh words. Jack adored her, and together they looked like everything I had once dreamed of for myself. But inside our home, the tension thickened. Brian refused to acknowledge the engagement as anything real. To him, Jack was just a boy, someone who would never measure up to his impossible standards. He sneered whenever Jack's name was mentioned. muttering under his breath about Emma being naive and easily fooled. And Jim. Oh, Jim had learned his father's cruelty far too well. My own son, the boy I had once cradled in my arms, joined his father in mocking Emma. "You think Jack can take care of you? He's pathetic," he'd say with a smirk. "Don't expect Dad to waste a dime on that wedding." Emma would snap back, her eyes flashing with the fire of a young woman who refused to be broken. "I don't need Dad's money. I don't need his approval. And I certainly don't need your opinion, Jim." I watched her, torn between pride and sorrow. Pride that she had the strength I never found, and sorrow that her own father and brother were her enemies instead of her protectors. One evening, as I sat in the living room folding laundry, I overheard Brian and Jim talking in hushed voices in the kitchen. Their words were low, but the venom in them was unmistakable. "She'll regret this," Brian muttered. "She already looks stupid," Jim snickered. "We'll just let her make a fool of herself. She'll come crawling back when it all falls apart," Brian said coldly. And then, laughter. Their laughter. At their own daughter, their own sister. My hands trembled as I gripped the fabric in my lap. That night I wept silently, not for myself, but for Emma. For the cruelty she was enduring from the very men who were supposed to love her most. But Emma, she didn't falter. She leaned on Jack, and she leaned on me. And in those moments, I began to feel something stir inside of me. A sense of purpose, I thought. I had lost long ago. I wasn't just Emma's mother. I was her ally, her shield, her reminder that she was not alone in this fight. Yet even as I tried to hold my daughter close, Brian was slipping further away into shadows I didn't fully understand. He stayed out late. He guarded his phone like it was a treasure chest, always turned face down, always hidden from sight. His tone with me grew sharper, colder, more distant, and though part of me tried to deny it, deep down I knew what was happening. There was someone else. At first I convinced myself I was imagining it, that maybe he was just busy. But the evidence grew impossible to ignore. A whiff of unfamiliar perfume on his shirt, a sudden urgency to shower the moment he got home, excuses for business trips that didn't exist. And then, one night when he thought I was asleep, I heard him whispering on the phone. His voice so tender, so soft, a tone I hadn't heard from him in years. "Yeah, I'll see you soon. Don't worry, she won't find out." My chest tightened, my breath caught. He was speaking of me, the she who wasn't supposed to find out. I lay in bed, frozen, staring at the ceiling as my heart shattered piece by piece. It wasn't just betraying me. It was that he still thought he could mock me, belittle me, and I would remain blind. But I wasn't blind anymore. The next day I looked at him differently. Every move, every word, every smirk, it all became a clue. I began to piece together the truth he thought he had hidden, and with each discovery my sadness turned into something else. Not rage, not yet, but a quiet, simmering determination. For years I had let this man dictate my worth. For years I had endured his cruelty in silence. For years I had watched him mold Jim into his reflection, while trying desperately to protect Emma from their influence. But this betrayal, this was different, because it gave me a reason to stop being quiet, a reason to finally stand tall, a reason to take back the life he had stolen from me. Emma noticed the change in me before anyone else did. One afternoon, as we sat together sipping tea, she studied me carefully. "Mom," she said softly, "you're different lately." I smiled faintly. "Different how?"
"You seem..."
"Stronger," she replied. "Like you're not afraid anymore." Her words nearly brought me to tears. She was right. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore, because fear had already stolen enough of my life. Brian and Jim continued their cruelty, too blind to see the storm that was quietly gathering inside me. They thought I was still the same woman who would bow her head. "Stay silent and let them trample me." But they were wrong. Very soon they would see just how wrong they were. The truth has a way of clawing itself to the surface, no matter how hard someone tries to bury it. And with Brian, the lies didn't stay hidden for long. It began one evening when Emma came home earlier than expected. She had stopped by a cafe with Jack after class, only to see her father sitting at a corner table. But he wasn't alone. He was leaning close to a woman half his age, his hand brushing against hers as they laughed together. Emma froze where she stood, her heart hammering in her chest. She told me about it later that night, her voice trembling with both anger and pain. "Mom," she whispered, "I saw him." With her, he wasn't even hiding it. I remember the way her hands shook, the way her eyes glistened with tears she was too strong to let fall. I wanted to tell her I was surprised. I wanted to tell her I couldn't believe it, but I couldn't, because deep down I had known all along. I reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "I know, Emma," I said softly. "I've suspected for a while." Her eyes widened. "You knew? And you didn't say anything?" Tears filled my own eyes then. "I wanted to protect you. I wanted to protect myself, but I can't stay silent anymore. Not now." The next morning, I watched Brian as he moved around the kitchen, humming to himself, his phone never leaving his side. For years, I had memorized every sneer, every dismissive glance, every cruel word. But now, there was something new in his face. Arrogance. The arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. I studied him carefully, my anger simmering beneath the surface. "Long night?" I asked casually, my voice calm, almost pleasant. He looked up at me, startled by my tone. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I replied with a faint smile. "Just wondering where you were." His eyes narrowed. "Don't start, Mary." And then he turned away, dismissing me like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. Not anymore. That evening I made a choice. I would stop living in silence. I would stop pretending. And I would stop allowing this man to treat me like I didn't matter. Emma was by my side through it all. She helped me gather the pieces of evidence, the late-night phone calls, the mysterious receipts, the perfume that didn't belong to me. She became my partner, my ally, my strength. Jim, of course, chose his father's side without question. "Mom, you're paranoid," he sneered when I tried to speak to him. "Dad would never do that. You're just bitter because you're old." His words cut deep, not because I believed them, but because they came from the mouth of my own son, the son I had loved, nurtured, and sacrificed for. But I refused to let his cruelty break me this time. The breaking point came one night at dinner. Brian had been drinking, his laughter loud, his insults sharper than usual. Emma sat across from him, her jaw tight. Her hands balled into fists beneath the table. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "Why don't you tell her, Dad?" Emma snapped, her voice trembling with fury. Brian froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "Tell her what?" Emma's eyes blazed. "Tell Mom about your girlfriend. The one you take to the cafe. The one you whisper to on the phone at night. The one you think no one knows about." The silence that followed was deafening. My heart pounded in my chest as Brian's face turned pale, then red with rage. "You little—" he began, his voice shaking. "Don't you dare!" Emma cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "Don't you dare try to make me the liar. I saw you, I know." He slammed his glass down on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "You think you know everything? You're just a spoiled little girl who doesn't understand how the world works." But I had heard enough. I pushed back my chair and stood, my voice calm but steady. "She's not lying, Brian. I know it too." His head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing. "You... what?" "I know," I repeated, my voice growing stronger. "I know about the late nights, the phone calls, the perfume. I know about her. I've known for a long time." His mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. For once, he had no script, no insult, no weapon to throw at me, because the truth was finally in the open. "You've humiliated me for years," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to fill the room. "You've belittled me, mocked me, made me feel like I was nothing. But this is the last time. I won't be silent anymore." The room fell into stunned silence. Jim stared at me, his face twisted with disbelief. Emma's eyes glistened with pride. And Brian simply sat there, his mask slipping, his arrogance crumbling. For the first time in years, he looked small. I turned and walked away from the table, my steps steady, my back straight. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not complete, not yet, but the first taste of it. And I knew then that this was only the beginning, because exposing the affair was one thing, but reclaiming my life, truly reclaiming it, was another battle entirely, and it was a battle I was finally ready to fight. The days that followed were a blur of tension, silence, and unspoken rage. Brian avoided me as much as he could, and when he couldn't, his words were sharp, dripping with venom. Jim refused to even look at me. He followed his father around like a shadow, echoing his every word, defending him at every turn. It broke my heart, but I refused to bend this time. One night, Brian stumbled in after midnight, his shirt untucked, the smell of cheap perfume clinging to him like smoke. I sat waiting in the living room, the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. He stopped when he saw me, his face darkening. "What are you doing up?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Waiting for you." His laugh was hollow. "Don't start, Mary. I've had a long day." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "No, Brian, you've had a long affair, and it ends tonight." For a moment, he said nothing. His jaw clenched, his fists curling at his sides. Then he sneered. "You think after all these years you finally grow a spine?" I stood slowly, my heart pounding, but my voice calm. "No, Brian, I didn't grow a spine tonight. I had one all along. You just spent years trying to break it." His eyes blazed with fury, but I didn't flinch. "Not this time." "I want a divorce," I said firmly. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. He stared at me as if I had slapped him, his mouth opening and closing, searching for words. Finally, he spat, "You'll regret this!" But the truth was, I had been regretting staying with him for years. The next few weeks were chaos. Papers were drawn up. Lawyers were called. Emma stood by me every step of the way, her strength giving me courage. But Jim, oh Jim, he couldn't understand. He wouldn't. "You're tearing this family apart," he shouted at me one evening, his face twisted with anger. I looked at him, my heart aching. "No, Jim, your father tore this family apart a long time ago. I'm just finally refusing to pretend anymore." But he didn't listen. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, his loyalty chained to the man who had poisoned our lives. It hurt more than I can ever describe, losing my son like that. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't back down now. The divorce hearings were brutal. Brian twisted every word, painted me as the villain, tried to strip me of everything I had left. But I held my ground. I told the truth, calmly, clearly, without fear. For the first time in years, I spoke with a voice that was mine, not the trembling whisper he had forced on me, but the strong, steady voice of a woman who had finally found her worth. Brian hated it. I could see it in his eyes every time I spoke. The more I stood tall, the smaller he seemed. Emma testified too. She told the court what she had seen, what she had endured. Her words were sharp, brave, unflinching. Jim refused to come. He stayed by Brian's side, convinced his father could do no wrong. But the world saw the truth. Piece by piece, Brian's mask crumbled. And then came the day the judgment was read. I remember sitting in that courtroom, my hands trembling, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the words. But when the final decision came, it was like chains falling from my shoulders. The house was mine. The assets were divided fairly. Brian would no longer control me, no longer hold me prisoner in a life built on lies. I walked out of that courtroom with Emma at my side, the sun shining down on us. And for the first time in decades, I felt free. But freedom doesn't erase the scars. Nights were still lonely. Memories still haunted me. The echo of Brian's voice, the sting of Jim's betrayal, they lingered like ghosts in the corners of my mind. Still, there was hope. Emma was thriving. She poured her heart into her studies, into her dreams, into building a life for herself that was untouched by her father's poison. And I began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. Some days I woke up and felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. But then I would look in the mirror, see the woman staring back at me, and remind myself I survived. Brian tried to fight me still, even after the divorce. He spread rumors, whispered lies, tried to turn what few friends I had against me. But the more he tried, the more pathetic he looked. The world could see him now for what he truly was, a bitter, broken man who had lost control. And though Jim still wouldn't speak to me, I held on to hope. Hope that one day he would see the truth. Hope that one day he would realize that I hadn't destroyed our family. His father had. Until then, I had Emma. And I had myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Freedom had tasted sweet, but rebuilding myself was a battle of its own. For the first time in decades, I was alone. The silence of the house pressed in on me some nights, like a weight I couldn't shake. I'd grown so used to fear, to walking on eggshells, that peace itself felt foreign. But little by little, I learned to live again. I painted the walls in colors that made me smile. I bought flowers just for myself, bright lilies and roses that filled the rooms with fragrance. I sat by the window with a book, the light streaming in, and realized that I could breathe. Really breathe. Without dread lurking around the corner. Emma came home often, her laughter ringing through the house like music. We cooked together, told stories late into the night, and for the first time in years, I felt like a mother again, not a prisoner, not a shell, but alive. And yet there was always a shadow Jim. My boy, my son, still distant, still poisoned by his father's lies. I wrote him letters, long and heartfelt, explaining, apologizing, reaching out. Some came back unopened. Some were never answered. But I refused to give up on him. A mother never stops hoping. As months turned into a year, whispers of Brian's life after me reached my ears. The woman he had left me for? She had left him too. His money was dwindling. His charm had worn thin. The mask he once wore so proudly had cracked, and the world was beginning to see the man underneath. It wasn't revenge I sought, not really. But when I heard that he had been forced to sell his house, that he was living in a cramped apartment, drinking away what little he had left, I won't lie, a part of me felt a dark satisfaction. He had taken so much from me, my youth, my joy, my peace, and now at last he was facing the emptiness he had sown. One afternoon, Emma and I went out for coffee. As we sat by the window laughing about something silly, I caught sight of a figure across the street. It was Brian, but not the man I remembered. His shoulders slumped. His clothes hung loose, wrinkled, unkempt. His eyes, once full of arrogance, were dull, empty. He saw me. For a moment our eyes locked, and then he looked away. No words were exchanged. No confrontation, just silence. But in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to prove anything. My life, my freedom, my happiness, my survival was proof enough. Brian was nothing more than a ghost of the man who once tried to control me. And I was stronger than ever. That night, as I sat on my porch, the cool evening breeze brushing against my skin, I thought of the long road I had walked. The fear, the betrayal, the heartbreak. And yet here I was, still standing, still breathing, still alive. I picked up my pen and began to write. Not another desperate letter to Jim, but a story. My story. The story of a woman who had been broken but not destroyed. Of a woman who had found her voice again. Of a woman who had chosen herself after years of being told she was nothing. As the words flowed, I realized that my life was no longer defined by Brian. It was defined by me, by my strength, by my survival, by my courage. And maybe, just maybe, someday Jim would read these words. Someday he would understand. But even if he never did, I knew one truth that could never be taken from me. I was free. And freedom, after all, is the greatest revenge, the greatest love story, the greatest triumph. I closed my notebook, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. For the first time in decades, the future felt like mine. And I whispered into the quiet night, more to myself than anyone else. This is not the end of my story. It is only the beginning.